So, it all started about 6 months ago, when I noticed something that didn't quite sit right with me. I had been married to Logan for 4 years, and for the most part, everything was great. We had a strong connection, a cozy little home, and no major issues. At least that's what I thought. It wasn't until one day when I started to notice a pattern that I couldn't ignore. At first it seemed innocent enough. Logan had always been a man of routine. He'd go to work, come home and spend time with me, or we'd go out for a walk or dinner. We had a simple, predictable rhythm and I liked it that way. But then something shifted. About 6 months ago, Logan started going out more frequently in the evenings. He'd always tell me he was meeting friends at the bar, and it didn't seem strange at first. I figured he deserved to unwind after work, and he had a few buddies he'd hang out with, so I let it slide. But after a while, it began to feel like I was hearing the same thing over and over again. Just meeting the guys at the bar. And it wasn't just once in a while anymore. It was every night. It became a routine like clockwork. He'd come home at the usual time, around midnight, a little later than I would have liked, but not too concerning. What bothered me, though, was that he never came home tipsy, never smelled like alcohol, or looked even remotely buzzed. It was as if he had been out for hours but didn't even touch a drink. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he was just in a phase. But there was something in the way he'd come back home, always quiet, always drained. It wasn't like him. He was the kind of guy who'd come home, chat about his day, crack open a beer and relax. But these nights, he seemed distant, almost like he was carrying some kind of weight, but refused to share what it was. I couldn't help but feel a growing unease every time he walked through the door. I started paying closer attention. When Logan went out, I'd stay behind, do the dishes, watch TV, and wait for him to come back. But it was more than that. I began noticing that something was off with the way he acted, with the way he carried himself. Sometimes, he'd have this faraway look in his eyes, like his mind was somewhere else. It wasn't like the usual tiredness from a long day at work. This was different. It was like he was checked out, emotionally distant in a way that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't long before I started to wonder if something was wrong. I knew him. I knew when he was hiding something. He wasn't the type to cheat, or at least that's what I told myself. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that something had changed. He was hiding something, and whatever it was too big for him to tell me. One evening I had enough. I had to know where he was going, what he was doing. So, when he said he was going out with the guys again, I made a decision. I was going to follow him. I didn't want to believe it, but the doubts were gnawing at me, and I couldn't shake them off any longer. Logan left the house just like any other night. His keys in his hand. His coat thrown over his shoulder. He kissed me on the cheek as if everything was normal, and I smiled back. But once he was out the door, I grabbed my coat, threw on my shoes and walked out after him, keeping a safe distance behind. I didn't know exactly what I was hoping to find, but I knew I couldn't keep ignoring my suspicions. He didn't go to the bar like he always said he did. Instead, he walked toward a neighborhood I didn't recognize. My heart started to race. I was sweating, my hands gripping the steering wheel of my car so tightly I thought my fingers might cramp. Where was he going? What was he up to? Why hadn't he told me about this place? I followed him down winding streets, my headlights flashing across the houses as he turned corners I didn't know existed. After a few blocks, he stopped in front of a house. I didn't know it. It wasn't some regular place where his friends lived. It was a house I'd never seen before, tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. Logan knocked on the door and someone let him in. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I sat there in my car, frozen. I stared at the house for what felt like an eternity, unsure of what to do. The seconds stretched into minutes, and my mind raced. What did this mean? Was he really just visiting a friend like he said? Or was this something else entirely? I couldn't wait any longer. Had to know. I reached for my phone and called Lisa, my best friend. I didn't know why I was calling her, but I needed someone to talk to. "Lisa," I said, my voice shaky. "Logan's acting strange again. I just followed him and he went to someone's house. Tell me, is he with Brian? Please, I need to know. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Yeah, he's with Brian, Lisa said, her voice uncertain. I could hear the hesitation in her tone, like she wasn't telling me everything. What's going on, Sarah? I wanted to ask her more, to press her for answers, but I didn't. Instead, I just hung up and sat in my car, staring at the house across the street. The same house where my husband was now inside. I don't know how long I sat in my car, staring at the house, my mind reeling. It felt like I was suffocating in my own thoughts. The cold air made me shiver, but it wasn't the chill that had me shaking. It was the knot of dread in my stomach, the uncertainty of what I'd just witnessed. Logan was in there. He was inside that house with people I didn't know, and it didn't make sense. Didn't add up. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't keep watching him, waiting for him to come out, because I knew if I did, I'd be putting off something I couldn't deny anymore. I needed answers, but I couldn't face it. Not right now. I needed time to process this. I couldn't breathe. I pulled away from the curb, turning back toward home, my hands gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline. The drive felt like a blur. I don't remember much of it, except for the steady rhythm of my heartbeat echoing in my ears. By the time I reached our house, it felt like I was walking into a different life. A life where everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my husband, was suddenly a lie. I didn't even bother to take my coat off. I just collapsed on the couch, my eyes blurred with tears that hadn't yet fallen. My chest ached with the pressure of everything I'd just witnessed, and the weight of my own silence crushed me. How could I have been so blind? How long had this been happening? How could Logan betray me like this? And how could I not have seen it? The questions swirled in my head, louder than anything else, until the sound of the door opening broke through the fog. My heart skipped a beat. Logan was home. I could hear him moving through the house, his shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't stumbling in like he had after a night out with his friends. He was eerily calm. Almost like he'd been expecting me to be home. I could hear him in the kitchen, dropping his keys in the bowl by the door. Then there was silence. I couldn't look at him. Not yet. I wasn't ready to confront him. I wasn't ready to hear the excuses, the lies, the hollow apologies. My throat tightened as the tears finally started to fall. I didn't want him to see me like this. I didn't want him to see the hurt, the betrayal that was so heavy in my chest. It was suffocating. I wiped my eyes quickly, but there was no hiding it. I could hear him walking toward the living room, the soft tread of his footsteps echoing in the quiet house. Sarah. His voice was tentative, but there was something in it, a softness that made my heart break all over again. Hey, are you okay? I didn't answer. Couldn't. I wasn't sure if I'd even be able to speak without breaking down completely. He stood there for a moment, probably waiting for me to say something. I could feel his eyes on me, but I didn't dare look up. Couldn't. If I did, I knew I wouldn't be able to stop the tears. I felt his presence behind me, standing just a few feet away, and I wanted to scream, to demand the truth. But I didn't. Instead, I just stayed silent, staring at the floor, my hands gripping the edge of the couch as if it could hold me together. Sarah, he started again, his voice softer this time, tinged with worry. What's going on? You've been distant lately. Hey, I know something's been off. Talk to me. I felt his hand on my shoulder, a gentle touch, as if he was trying to reach me. I couldn't respond. I couldn't tell him what I had seen. The truth was too much to bear. My breath hitched, and I tried to control it, to not let the sobs escape, but they came anyway. Quiet at first, then louder as they racked through my body. Sarah. His voice broke with the sound of my tears. I could hear him sit down beside me, but I didn't want him near me. Not right now. Not after everything I'd just seen. I felt the warmth of his hand on my back, but I couldn't let him comfort me. Not when I was falling apart inside. Not when he was the reason for it. I pulled away from him, my voice barely a whisper. Please. Just don't. My words were broken, fractured, but they were all I could manage. Logan didn't say anything at first. He just sat there in the silence, the weight of my words hanging between us. I could feel him trying to understand, trying to piece together why I was acting this way, but he wouldn't understand. Not yet. The room felt too small, the air too thick, and the silence between us was deafening. It felt like hours, but it couldn't have been more than a few minutes before I heard him sigh. "Okay, I'll give you some space. But when you're ready to talk, I'll be here." His voice was strained, his words almost pleading. But I didn't want to hear them. I didn't want his apologies or his reassurances. I just wanted the truth. The truth that I couldn't ask for yet. I didn't look up as he left the room, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. And when I was alone again, I let myself finally break. I cried until I couldn't cry anymore, until I was hollow, empty, and exhausted. And through it all, the only thing I could think was, how could he do this to me? The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. Logan tried to act like everything was normal, but I could see the cracks forming. I couldn't ignore the way his eyes would linger on me for a second too long before quickly turning away, as though he was searching for something I couldn't give him. I couldn't bear the thought of facing him, of pretending like everything was fine. I knew it wasn't. I knew he was lying, and I wasn't ready to forgive him. He didn't call. He didn't ask about the tears or the silent treatment. He just left every night, the same routine as always. But this time, I was determined not to let him slip away without answers. No more waiting. No more wondering. I was going to follow him again. When Logan got up one night, grabbed his jacket and said, "I'm just heading out to the bar," something in me snapped. I wasn't going to let him walk out of that door again without seeing where he went, without knowing who he was meeting. My heart pounded as I followed him quietly, careful not to make a sound. He didn't even glance back when he walked out. He didn't even notice that I was trailing behind him, keeping a safe distance, just like I had before. The drive was nerve-wracking. Every turn, every corner felt like an eternity. My mind raced with the endless questions that I needed answers to, that I couldn't ignore anymore. I kept reminding myself that I had to stay calm, that I couldn't jump to conclusions without knowing for sure. But even as I said that, a part of me knew I already had the answer. The truth was hanging over us, and I wasn't sure I was strong enough to face it. When Logan pulled up to that same house from before, my stomach dropped. There it was, the house where he'd disappeared for hours, where I had waited in my car for what felt like forever. He went inside without a second thought, as though he knew he could do whatever he wanted without consequence. I couldn't wait. I couldn't sit in my car again, questioning what was happening behind those walls. I had to see it for myself. I parked a few blocks away and walked briskly toward the house, trying to calm the shaking in my hands. My breath came in shallow bursts, my mind spinning with panic and rage. But I didn't stop. Not this time. I approached the door and knocked. The seconds felt like minutes as I waited, my pulse thumping in my ears. I almost turned around. I almost ran away, but I knew I couldn't. Not anymore. I had to know the truth, and this was the only way to get it. The door creaked open, and standing there was Lisa, my best friend, the woman I had trusted. I don't know what I expected, but it sure wasn't this. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, and for a brief second, she didn't know what to say. There was silence between us, heavy and suffocating. "Lisa," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What is going on? Why is he here? What is happening?" She opened the door wider, but she didn't invite me in. She didn't have to. I could see it all. The people inside, the chaos, the laughter, and there, at the center of it all, was Logan. Standing there, with his arm wrapped around a woman I didn't know, laughing, as if this was all just some kind of joke. My heart shattered in that moment. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw things at them. I wanted to tear this whole place down, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Lisa stood in the doorway, looking guilty, looking like she had no idea how to explain what I was seeing. But what was there to explain? The truth was staring me in the face. Logan wasn't just going out for drinks. He was hiding something bigger. Something I couldn't even comprehend. "What is this?" I whispered, barely able to speak. "Is this why you've been acting like this? Is this what you've been doing behind my back?" Lisa's eyes flickered nervously, and she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of them. Not now. I couldn't even look at Logan. I couldn't bear to see the shame in his eyes, the guilt that he must have felt. I didn't want him to feel sorry for me. I didn't want his apologies because none of it mattered. None of it could change what I was seeing right in front of me. Without a word, I turned and stormed into the house. I didn't care about the people standing around, the whispers or the stares. I was beyond caring at that point. I was done being the wife who sat at home, waiting, hoping for things to get better. I was done. I went straight up to Logan. I didn't even hesitate. I grabbed his arm roughly, pulling him away from the woman he'd been with. He looked at me, startled, like he hadn't expected me to confront him. But I couldn't stop now. "How long, Logan?" Choked out. "How long have you been doing this? With her? With everyone? How could you do this to me?" He looked like he was about to speak, but the words wouldn't come. He just stood there, helpless, like a man caught in a lie too big to undo. And in that moment I hated him. I hated how he had betrayed me, how he had made me feel like I wasn't enough. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find by confronting him. Maybe I thought it would be cathartic, maybe I thought it would make things clearer. But all I felt was emptiness. A deep, cold emptiness that swallowed me whole. I turned and walked out, not bothering to say another word. The house, the people, everything faded away as I made my way back to the car. I couldn't look at Logan anymore. Not like this. Not when everything I had believed in was now a lie. I didn't know how I made it back home. It was all a blur. My mind racing, my heart pounding, the angry hum of my thoughts drowning out everything else. All I could hear was the pounding of my fists against the steering wheel. And even that didn't seem enough. I was angry. I was devastated. But most of all I was lost. I didn't know who I was anymore, or who he was. Logan had broken something inside me. Something I wasn't sure I'd ever get back. I walked into the house, the door slamming behind me as I threw my keys onto the table. I didn't care about being quiet, about being reasonable. I was done being quiet, done pretending like everything was fine. The walls that had once been my sanctuary now felt like a prison. Logan's things were everywhere. His shoes by the door, his coat hanging on the chair, the sound of his laughter from earlier still ringing in my ears. But now it all felt like a mockery. I started with the kitchen, unable to stop myself. I yanked open the cabinet doors, throwing dishes onto the floor. The sharp crash of glass splintering across the tile. Felt good. It felt like I was finally releasing all the rage, the pain, the betrayal that had been building up inside me for so long. I picked up a vase, the one we'd gotten for our first anniversary, and smashed it against the wall. Each piece that broke was a little piece of my heart shattering. I didn't care. I didn't care anymore. I moved through the house like a whirlwind, tearing through the living room, pulling apart the couch cushions, knocking over anything that wasn't nailed down. I could hear the sounds of furniture toppling, the chaotic noise of my anger, but it didn't matter. The house felt hollow now, empty just like I felt inside. I ripped his pictures from the walls, the ones of us smiling on vacation, the ones of us at our wedding. I could still hear the laughter from those moments, and it made my stomach turn. Those memories were lies. All of it was a lie. He wasn't the man I thought he was. He wasn't the man who promised me forever. He was just another stranger. The room was a wreck. The floor was littered with broken glass, shattered frames, pieces of furniture. And still I couldn't stop. It was as if destroying everything would somehow make it real, would somehow make the hurt stop. But it didn't. I stood there, breathless, surrounded by the wreckage of my life. It was like a bad dream that I couldn't wake up from. Everything I had built, everything I had trusted was gone. It felt like the world was closing in on me, and I couldn't breathe. I didn't know where to go, but I knew I couldn't stay here. Not in this place that once felt like home. I grabbed my coat, not caring that I wasn't thinking straight. I just needed to get away. I needed to escape from the ruins of my own life. My mother's house was the only place I could think of. The one place where I wouldn't feel alone, even if it was just for a little while. I drove in a daze, the road blurring beneath me as I tried to steady my mind, tried to make sense of everything that had just happened. My thoughts kept drifting back to Logan, the way he had looked at me when I walked into that house, the shame in his eyes, the way he hadn't even tried to stop me. He didn't care. Not really. I pulled into my mother's driveway, the familiar feel of her home a strange comfort. I parked the car, but I didn't move. I just sat there for a moment trying to collect myself. My hands were trembling. My chest ached. I didn't even know if I could face her. But I had no choice. I needed her. I needed someone who could make the world feel less broken. I walked up to the door and knocked. My heart was pounding, my stomach in knots. I knew she'd be worried. I knew she'd want answers. But I didn't know if I could give her any. How could I explain to her that the man I had trusted had destroyed everything? How could I explain to her the heartbreak of finding out that everything I thought was real was nothing but a lie? The door opened, and there she was. My mother standing in the doorway, her face soft with concern. "Sarah," she said, her voice full of worry. "What's wrong?" I couldn't answer her. I couldn't find the words. Instead, I just collapsed into her arms, and she held me tightly like she always had when I was a little girl. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, her voice soothing, but I could hear the uncertainty in it. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to fix this. But she didn't have to. She didn't need to say anything. I didn't need any more words. All I needed was this, her arms around me, her warmth, and the quiet reassurance that for tonight I wasn't alone. Logan had broken something in me. He had shattered everything I thought I knew about love, about trust, about us. And maybe in time I'd find a way to rebuild. But for now, I just needed to let myself feel the weight of it all. I needed to cry, to release all the pain that had been building up. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I had to hold it all together. As I cried in my mother's arms, I realized something. Sometimes the only way to move forward is to let everything fall apart first.